In this video, Chuck Missler, Christian evangelist, provides a warning about the Freemasons and their impact upon America and the world, particularly leading up to the development or creation of a new world order. Why is his message important is that he used to be the director of Hadron Inc. with Earl Bryan, who had the CIA's modified PROMIS software. He then was appointed to become the chairman and CEO of HELIONETICS by William Simon, former US Treasurer, to lead their Star Wars program with the famous American physicist Dr. Edward Teller. William Simon is also the director of Citibank, which has the Transaction Technologies subsidiary that had the PROMIS software and was operating CIA's Project Hammer. Also the financial backer behind HELIONETICS, responsible for the whole Star Wars program for Ronald Reagan, is Robert Gray, who was a co-director of EastCo and Consultants International with Ed Wilson, Ted Shackley, Richard Secord, Eric Van Marbod, Thomas Kleins and Michael Ledeen, who are all intimately involved with Le Cercle and the 6i. He also represented BCCI, money laundering, and represented the Kuwait royal family and also the Nicaraguan resistance. And the common investor was Bernard Katz, who founded Exonics with Earl Bryan, which was for tracking nuclear submarines using sonar towing systems, and the team moved across to then found Hadron Inc. He is a brilliant physicist, Chuck Missler. He invented and developed the encryption systems used by NSA for their Echelon satellites for tracking nuclear submarines and also for communications, but he understands how the elite powers are behind the Star Wars program, weapons of mass destruction of nuclear weapons, and also understands the elite power behind governments. Given that Michael's first warning of the application of PROMIS was for tracking nuclear submarines, and the second application was that it was modified and put into Citibank for Earl Bryan and CIA to move all their covert funds through the SWIFT banking network, Chuck Missler understands how elite power works and understands what's really going on in the world, both America and Europe. And so let's have a look at his message after resigning. As he becomes Christian evangelist dedicated to preaching against the formation of a new world order. And his message is now about a warning of the Freemasons. So let's now listen to his message and concerns about the Freemasons' impact.
The Freemasonry expectations. That may sound like a very strange selection, and it is for a number of reasons. Because there's probably not one person in 100, including the Freemasons, that really know what they believe. Because most of what they advertise is only at the open ranks. The serious part of Freemasonry is kept secret until you earn the access to what's really going on. So it's a very strange place to try to research. As usual, though, we like to keep ourselves in perspective of the profile that the Lord Jesus himself gave us with his 7 epistles. And the 7 epistles of Christ. The epistles to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. These 7 churches were selected by the Lord to profile the church throughout all history. And it does it, as we looked before, in several different levels. But the one that's the most amazing is the discovery that they actually lay out in advance the history of the church. That it actually goes through 7 stages. Ephesus of the Apostolic Church. The pluses and minuses, the report cards by the Lord are of that era especially. It was followed by the persecuted church, and there again, his advice and counsel and comfort is specifically directed. And what Satan could not accomplish by persecuting the church, he accomplished by marrying the church to the world. Pergamos, the perverted marriage. And we have the 3rd and 4th century man's inventions which led to what we call church. But then that led into the medieval period, that's characterized by Thyatira, that we looked at in some depth last night. Following that was the denominational church. And strangely enough, it's one of each of the 7. There are 2 of them that have nothing good said, and there's 2 that have nothing bad said. Strangely enough, Sardis is one of the 2 about which nothing good is said. You have a name, but you're dead, is basically the flavor of that letter. That's followed by the Philadelphia church, was the winner of the bunch. Everybody that studies these realizes we're part of the Philadelphia church, of course. And of course, most of us recognize the reality that we live in that era that could be properly called the apostate church, as churches experiment with the emergent church and the smells and bells rather than the real substance of God's word, and on and on and on. The apostate church certainly characterizes, and that as we explore where we are today, clearly we're at a climax of apostasy in many ways. As we pointed out before, the first 3 are very peculiar letters because the promises to the overcomer, which each one has, in the first 3 is postscripted like a PS for some strange reason. It's in the last 4 that the promises to the overcomer are in the body of the letter. So that structural difference catches our attention. And we believe that everything there is for a deliberate purpose. We also notice that the last 4 include an explicit reference to the second coming of Christ, uniquely so. So as we study these letters carefully, and obviously it's not our intention to do that here this morning, but this should be by way of review or make you at least aware that there's huge, huge discoveries to be made by studying the 2. First of all, there's only one book in the Bible that has the audacity, if I can use that word, to say, read me, I'm special. All through the Bible, you're encouraged to read the Bible in a collective sense. Only one book has the chutzpah to say, read me, I'm special. And that's the book of Revelation. When you do that, you'll also discover out of the 22 chapters, there's only 2 that primarily refer to us. The first is sort of an introductory set of identities. And then chapters 2 and 3 are 7 epistles by the Lord Jesus Christ. And for a lot of technical reasons, when chapter 4 opens with verse 1, it's all future. What affects you and me is the 7 letters in Revelation 2 and 3. And so that's why we're sort of using that as our background fabric for the studies this weekend. Well, Thyatira has an explicit promise that if it doesn't get its act together, it's going to go into the Great Tribulation. And after last night's review, we can get some flavor of that, I think. Philadelphia, in contrast, has just the opposite promise. It's promised that it will be removed from the time of the tribulation. Speaking of a very definitive 3.5-year period that Jesus himself labels. That leaves the 2 that are problematic, both Sardis and Laodicea, and that'll depend on their personal conduct, obviously. But now, we've discovered, though, as we explore the expectations of the Antichrist, they have their roots way back in Genesis, when there was one language in Hebrew. And in the 11th chapter of Genesis, we discover there was a godless confederacy led by the first world dictator. A guy is known as Nimrod, whose name means we will rebel. And it's astonishing to discover how much of the expectations of the seed of the serpent, the Antichrist, have their roots there. And the illusions use those terms to refer to it. He ruled on the plain of Shinar, built a tower to heaven, Babel, tower to El, God, which is some form of astrological temple And it was there that we discovered the Mazzaroth, the zodiac as we know it, gets corrupted. It's quite astonishing to discover in all the ancient cultures, the 12 constellations of what we call the zodiac are identical. Same names, same concepts, same story background, sort of. But it somehow gets corrupted there at Babel. It existed prior to that. It's speculated by many scholars they were the mnemonics that Adam and his subsequents used to teach their kids God's plan of redemption. And Psalm 19 seems to support that. But in any case, you can also study the whole Bible as a drama between two cities. Babel, which becomes Babylon, and yes, there is a pun deliberate by the Holy Spirit there. Babel becomes Babel. The city of man, or the city of Satan, or the city of sin, call it what you like. In contrast to Jerusalem, which becomes, at least metaphorically, the city of God. With all its problems and all its setbacks, it stands still all the way through to Isaiah 66 and Revelation 22. It emerges as still the city with God's name on it, Jerusalem. Now, as we study history, though, many of you probably have done enough homework to realize that the occult lies behind a surprising amount of our secular history. Most people who have studied the rise of Nazi Germany know that it rose out of an occult society, the Thule Society, which was a society of occultists that trafficked in secret belief structures. And that was the core belief system behind the Nazi Party. And that also explains Hitler's preoccupation with the occult. Some of that's made into modern entertainment things, but the Indiana Jones nonsense, which is just entertainment, but it's based on a preoccupation that was real. The Nazis were chasing all kinds of things. The spear of Longinus, which they felt had secret powers. They were seriously looking for the Ark of the Covenant. They didn't find it, but there was a bona fide commitment of resources that gives rise to the entertainment stuff that we make fun of. The Ark of the Covenant was sought after. Well, with all that going on with Nazi Germany, we won't spend a lot of time on that today, but the question that should lurk in our thinking, are there powerful pagan cult alliances today? And there certainly are. There's many people that have fanciful presumptions about Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati and the Bilderbergers and so forth. And these bloggers love to pick up on this and accuse us of all kinds of strange things. I have to share with you something in private. Several of our board members, we meet once a year in October in Idaho, and we're facing that this coming October, and all our board gets together. We've been promising ourselves we're going to have a special dinner of the board where we're going to build a burger. And it's going to be our Build-A-Burger meeting. And we're going to do that mischievously, seriously, just to stir the pot. Missler'S having another one of his Build-A-Burger meetings. And of course, we're just poking fun at these people that there's a certain group of people that seem to delight in slandering and spreading lies of all kinds, and the best thing to do is just ignore them. But one of the things that we want to talk a little bit about are the Freemasons. There is a great deal of controversy as to what really is Freemasonry and what role it had in the early years of America. And it's interesting that in January of 2007, House Resolution 33 in the first session of the 110th Congress recognized, quote, thousands of Freemasons in every state of the nation, close quote. So these issues of who's a Mason and who isn't actually has gotten into the congressional record. And as you study American history, it becomes quite clear to the students that guys like Benjamin Franklin and George Washington were active Freemasonry practitioners, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Paul Revere, Edmund Burke, John Hancock. Join the names of the founders of the early pioneers, the strong men, if you will, of Freemasons, Albert Pike and Albert Mackey and Aleister Crowley. And the writings of Manly P. Hall are paramount in understanding the background. If you can get your hands on any of those books, they're astonishing is what they reveal about this private cult, if you will. Blavatsky, Pierre Lafont, the designer of Washington, was a Freemason. And so, for what it's worth, Teddy Roosevelt, William Taft, Warren G. Harding, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a Mason. Henry Wallace was not only a Mason, he's the reason that your dollar bill has these things that we're going to look at here in a minute. Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, James Polk, James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield. Most of our previous presidents were all Masons. Now, what does that mean? Most people that only progress to maybe the third level, it's a social group that busies themselves in trying to do good socially. Like a lodge or the Rotaries or whatever. They're considered colorful but quite innocuous. But as you progress within Freemasonry, you gradually discover that there are aspects to it that are only revealed to those who have earned the right to know. So it starts to take on a whole different complexion, and I just, rather than get into a lot of that background, I just decided it's hard to find famous people who are not Freemasons. It's astonishing. Rudyard Kipling, who wrote the books, and on it goes. It's amazing how many somehow at some level involve themselves in what's called Freemasonry. Now, many people in Freemasonry try to link their linkage back to Solomon's temple and make a big thing of that, but that's a blind spot. No, it actually goes all the way back to Babel, Genesis 11, and that embracing the occultic beliefs of the Rosicrucians and so forth. And Hiram Abiff was the first Grand Master of the Order of Masons, presumably. He was the chief architect of the Temple of Solomon, but it actually started much earlier than that. And but see, they package these things in innocuous, socially acceptable trappings. Most people in Freemasonry have no grasp. They do know that they're required to believe in a supreme being. Oh, that's wonderful. And the title they love to use of him is the great architect of the universe. Very popular label used by George Washington in his prayers and used very broadly to represent what you and I think of as God, right? Be careful. We discover much of their thinking comes from Francis Bacon, an occultic commitment to the new Atlantis that lurks behind the whole history of America, strangely enough. They felt that that's what they were doing. And we discover something else as you study speeches. There are certain code phrases that are used in contemporary speeches that you and I would miss unless you have a Freemasonry background. The angel that rides in the whirlwind and directs the storm. Really? Yes, this was used by President Bush in a speech. Sounds like just some fancy words, not to a Freemason. It's a code word of sorts. Below the surface realities that may be, for political reasons, be hidden from the radar of civilians, while at the same time signaling the brokers of power concerning the real or deep or political or spiritual agenda at play. And when we had the war with Iraq and we had the shock and awe, remember? Shock and awe is a Hebrew term. Shock and awe was the English rendering of it. The mother of all bombs, remember that? That translates into Moab. You discover that some of these terms that are used in the press in a superficial way, a fire in the minds of men. There's a whole list of these code words that mean nothing to you unless you have a background in Freemasonry. Novus Ordo Seclorum, the New World Order. That's a term taken from the New Atlantis by Francis Bacon that shows up on your dollar bill. It's not a term of just recent politicians. To give you one example of the kinds of things you start running into chasing this sort of thing down, you discover the number 11 is one of those code words, strangely enough, okay? 11 represents a dark vision. Doubling that is the vision combined with action. Tripling it is the vision plus action, which means accomplishment. So they play with the numbers to carry a form of emphasis, if you will. What do I mean by that? Is it a coincidence, mere coincidence, that exactly 11 years to the date following George H.W. Bush's New World Order speech, and 11 years before 2012, that on September 11th, Flight 11 crashed into the Twin Towers? There's a lot of coincidences there, isn't there? What a coincidence. The Flight 11 crashed in the Twin Towers, whose appearance side by side not only formed a Masonic-like pillared gateway, but also architecturally depicted the number 11. Also consider that Flight 11 hit the Twin Towers first, and Flight 11 had how many crew members? 11. And New York, of course, was the 11th state added to the Union. The words New York City have 11 letters. Afghanistan, the first nation the U.S. attacked following 9/11, has 11 letters. Are these just coincidental? Are these just colorful coincidences? Possibly, frankly. And yet, within the cult of Freemasonry, this takes on profound significance because it's so predictable. The name George W. Bush has 11 letters. The words the Pentagon, which was also attacked on 9/11, has 11 letters. Why? And Flight 77 hit the Pentagon, which is located on the 77th meridian. And the foundation stone for the Pentagon was laid in 1941 on September 11th in a Masonic ceremony. Really? Is there something strange going on behind the scenes? Let me tell you something. Most of you know my background, and you know that I've been alarmed and concerned that we have a practicing Sunni Muslim in the White House. That's made me nervous. I've discovered something else that makes me even more nervous. I'm beginning to be convinced that he is being managed by occult managers. We all remember the inauguration where they had the Greek columns, that whole thing set up for the inauguration. Those aren't Greek columns, they are replicas of Nuremberg that Hitler had set up when he made his first speech. And it's all geared to the way Obama handled his inauguration. And you suddenly realize it's missed by most people, but it's not missed by anyone that has an occultic background. They're signals, they're confirmations. And the more you study his moves, the more you study the dates that he makes his key speeches and so forth and so on, you begin to get a sense that he is being managed by people who are following a profile of the occult. Babel, not Solomon's temple, it goes way back to Babel. The Rosicrucians, the Knights Templar, these all have their roots into the, and Adam Weishaupt in May 1st of 1776 in his Illuminati, he merges that into the Freemasonry. And we discover as you start studying these things, they're pervasive social networks of mysticisms. The Rosicrucian is the forerunner of Masonry. That goes back to the 1300s. The secret mysteries of America's beginnings are explained by Sir Francis Bacon and traced from England following. Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati merged on the 1st of May of 1776, and that's on your dollar bill for some strange reason. The question that lurks behind some of these issues, is it possible that America was designed by the occultists to be the new Atlantis as specified by Francis Bacon back in the early days? That's a question. Well, when you take out your dollar bill, you'll discover there is the Great Seal of the United States on your dollar bill. Most of us are familiar with it if you've ever looked at it carefully. And there are elaborate explanations for each of the elements in terms of the 13 colonies and the founding of America, and that's all baloney. That's all been designed to hide the real meanings, interestingly enough. This was designed and accepted in 1782 by the Freemasons. It was influenced by European mysticism. It was put on the dollar bill in 1935 by Henry A. Wallace, the vice president under FDR. Wallace was fascinated by the occult, and he talked FDR into doing this. The Great Seal of the United States. Doesn't that look wonderful? That's not an eagle, by the way. Everybody thinks it is. No, it's a phoenix. It's the phoenix, the sun god Amun-Ra, celebrated by the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Persians. An eagle sacred to the sun. It was also the symbol of the tribe of Dan, and there's a whole side issue there. It was also the living symbol of Mendes, a representative of the sun. 13 colonies, you say, right? 13 stars and 13 stripes and so forth, right? Is that really what they are? We notice in Latin there is e pluribus unum, out of many one. It's announcing something new. Okay, e pluribus unum, right? Out of many one. But when we examine the bird's feathers more carefully, on the right wing it has 32 wing feathers, and on the left one you have 33, celebrating the 32nd and 33rd Scottish rites of Freemasonry. That's the level at which you find out what's really going on. That isn't until you accede to that level you find out more about the one that you're worshiping. Up till then, he's the great architect of the universe. We'll come back to that in a minute. On the right, you have the 32, and on the left, you have the 33. But then you've got the tail feathers. Why are there 9 tail feathers on the... Because it represents the Council of 9 when the Illuminati was merged into the Freemasonry. Interesting. Well, let's take a look at the other side. Let's flip it over. It gets really, we quickly see the all-seeing eye, the open eye of Egypt. That's a symbol of Osiris, the men's eye of the Gnostics. We notice also that we have the 1776 date is blazoned at the base of the pyramid. That's the birth of the Illuminati by Adam Weishaupt, professor of law at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, and merged into them at that time. And then we have this Annuit Corpus, announcing the birth of. See that top, the Annuit Corpus, in Latin, it's the announcing the birth of. What's it announcing the birth of? Novus Order Seclorum, the new world order. That's a term out of The New Atlantis by Francis Bacon. It's not a term that was invented by recent politicians. It's a term that's picked up and celebrated by the current politicians. Wow. Novus Order Seclorum, the new order for the world, or the Seclorum. Okay. Well, of course, there is the Statue of Liberty, right? I suspect is the twilight's last gleaming that we're dealing with here, because we may be in a deeper spiritual warfare than you and I have any idea. What is the Statue of Liberty? It's the Masonic torch of enlightenment, as preserved in an ancient marble tablet still today in the Archaeological Museum of Corinth, in Corinth, Greece. It was presented in 1884 gift to the American Masons by the French Grand Orient Temple Masons. So the Masons gave it to the Masons as a gift. 151 statue of what? It's the sun god Apollo. It's presently, obviously, over one of the major ports of the world, wearing a toga, having a radiant crown of 7 spiked sun rays. It was designed and sculptured by Freemason Frederick Auguste Bartholdi. And it was manufactured for him by a French Freemason by the name of Gustave Eiffel, the guy that made the Eiffel Tower. Most people have no grasp of what was behind all that when that happened. But all through Freemasonry, the thing you discover that you're okay because you're going to celebrate the GOTU. They have a war not against terrorism or communists or liberals. No. A spiritual war against the one true God, waged in the manifestation of an ancient pagan dream, of a usurper who calls himself the great architect of the universe. Really. His identity is only revealed at the senior levels, the 32nd and 33 degrees. And are they serious about keeping secrets? If you're in Freemasonry, you sign a blood oath. You're sworn to secrecy under blood oaths, which include having your throat slit, your eyeballs pierced, your tongues torn out, your feet flayed, and your bodies hacked into pieces and so on. Wow. And they celebrate.
I think the fact that Chuck Missler, appointed to become the chairman and CEO of the leading company and team of admirals and the nuclear physicist Edward Teller, who invented the hydrogen bomb for their Star Wars program under Ronald Reagan, to resign and become a Christian evangelist preaching against the elite powers of the occult and the Freemasons on their control on the American government and European governments, I think is profound. And I think the fact that is that he understands all of the technologies used by Echelon, the CIA, NSA, DRO, spy satellite system used for tracking nuclear submarines and also for infiltrating all communication systems and infiltrating the banking SWIFT network. With the leading bankers of the world that founded the Federal Reserve, and all my research leading to the Rothschilds, Le Cercle, the Six Eye, with Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, Ted Shackley's team, involved in the money laundering of drugs and arms with terrorists worldwide, and behind the commencement of all wars that we know in all countries across the world, I think is profound and is consistent with the prophecies of Daniel and Revelations. And I think his message has significance. He's not just your average Christian evangelist. I believe that his role, working at the highest levels of the echelon of power, has caused him to warn the world about their plan for a new world order, and the impact and driving force behind it is not of God but of Satan.